Welcome to the AmericanaMusic.com podcast with your host, Sarah Popejoy.
Today on AmericanaMusic.com podcast, we welcome two-time Grammy nominee singer-songwriter Gretchen Peters. Inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, she's a songwriter, writing country hits like Independence Day for Martina McBride, You Don't Even Know Who I Am for Patty Loveless, and Faith Hill's The Secret of Life. Other elite artists who've cut her songs include Etta James Bonnie Raitt, Trisha Yearwood, Bryan Adams, the Neville Brothers, and George Strait. She's received International Album of the Year Award for her album Blackbirds and Song of the Year by the UK Americana Association. We are privileged to have Gretchen Peters on our show today. Welcome, Gretchen.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Well, thank you. You're in Tennessee now, living in Nashville.
I'm actually I've got one foot in Tennessee and the other foot in Florida. I'm in the process of moving. I'll be in Nashville some of the time, but my permanent home is going to be in Florida in a couple of months.
Oh, wow. That's a big change.
I'm doing a lot of hopping back and forth right now.
Usually when we start out the show, I ask people about where they're from, but I wanted to also start with your song that you usually end with your shows. The song Idlewood, you have a description about it on your blog. You talk about the events that were impacting our country and the world and also impacting your family. Some of those events included the Kennedy assassination and Medgar Evers in the civil rights movement. Can you talk a little bit about where you grew up, but also about the story behind that song?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That song is really important to me because I guess partly because it's very autobiographical. It's basically kind of the protagonist in that song is me as a 5-6-year-old child. I grew up in Pelham, New York, which is just a few miles outside of Manhattan. My father worked as a documentary producer and an author. He was a journalist and he wrote at the time during the 60s when I was a little kid, he was writing about the civil rights movement almost exclusively. Although we lived in New York, my father was going down to Mississippi and Alabama and other places in the South to cover what was going on. And he became close friends with Medgar Evers. And so it was kind of as though, in a way, it was kind of happening right in our backyard. We were as a little kid, very aware of what was happening in the South. And, it was discussed at the dinner table every night. And we would see my dad's, his pieces on CBS reports at night. We'd turn on the TV and watch the news. And, something that my dad had produced would be on CBS. When Medgar was assassinated, it was like someone in our family had died almost. I mean, my father's reaction to it was he basically went down in the basement and didn't come back up for a couple of days. He was deeply, deeply affected by that. And I always look at Medgar Evers' assassination, which I think kind of gets really overlooked when people are talking about that period in the 60s, Martin Luther King, both Robert and JFK. I think Medgar's assassination, it felt to me like it was the predecessor to all that. It was the first kind of seismic shock that happened in all of that. Because of my father's relationship with him, that was a really huge event in our family. The song Idlewild is basically a memory that I have of riding in the back seat to the airport to pick up my grandmother, who used to come kind of back and forth from New York and Florida. She would spend the winters in Florida with her sister. And Idlewild is the airport that was later renamed JFK.
Oh.
And there's a line in the song that they'll name it after Kennedy, the one who died today. So the song takes place on the day that JFK is assassinated. On a symbolic level, on a metaphorical level, it's about the simultaneous fracturing of the world that had felt up to that point quite safe and secure to me, the bigger world, and the smaller world of my family, which was also fracturing. The relationship between my mother and father was kind of coming apart at the same time. And so it's kind of a look at both of those worlds and how that felt from the point of view of a very young, very small person who, as many of the protagonists in many of my songs are, kind of these things are happening to them and they don't have a whole lot of power or agency. That seems to be a theme that I go back to a lot. So in that sense, the setting is the 60s and all of the tumult and the drama and the tragedy that was going on. But it's also the smaller world of the family kind of coming apart as well. Because for me, I experienced all of that at the same time.
Wow. My dad grew up around that time.
One of the things that's different about today from then is that we all, and when I say we all, I mean literally everybody in this country, listened to Walter Cronkite, who my dad worked with at CBS. We got the same news. We saw the same things on our TV. There were 3 channels, maybe 4 or 5. If you lived like I did in New York, maybe there were 5. But the idea is that we really all were experiencing all of these things that were happening. And even in the song Idlewild, I even bring in the men landing on the moon, which happened a little later. But we watched that. We all watched that on the same screen. We saw the same thing. And that's quite different from how it is today. So it felt like the memory in that song is my memory, but it's also a generational memory. Anybody who lived through it has those same images in their head, those same memories.
I was listening to an interview you did with the Tennessean this past January. You said that we write songs or we write anything to express ourselves is a little bit of a misunderstanding, and that you really write songs to find out how you feel about things. Can you talk a little bit about that? I found that very profound.
At some point during my writing life, I realized that what was really more interesting and really contained more substance, I guess, to write about was the questions, not the answer. There are big questions that we as human beings, we all have. Like, what does it mean that I'm going to die someday? What does mortality mean? Will I find love? Will I be alone? We all have some sort of the big questions. We're the same. But I just felt like that writing isn't just having the answer and then regurgitating it. In other words, sort of presenting whatever wisdom I've accumulated as a human being in a rhyme scheme with a melody. It's not really about that, or at least the best songs aren't about that. The best songs to me ask questions which on some level are not answerable, but at least you can kind of poke and prod at the questions and kind of tease them out and see what they mean, what emotions they bring up. You can explore them, I guess. And that to me is where the really great songs live, is in that question area rather than here are all the answers. And I think early on, I had this idea that I was writing to express what I know. Thankfully, I got away from that and I got more interested in what I don't know or what I worry about or what I think about at 3 a.m, which is scary to articulate to anybody. That's the stuff that really makes people really resonate with a great song, is when they see somebody having doubts and having vulnerability and having questions and they go, I have those same questions. I feel that same way. I worry about the same things. I think I finally sort of realized those are the things I really want to write about. So I just feel like I'm really in the process of writing more, exploring that part of myself than I am just re-serving you some kind of platitude that I picked up along the way.
Wow.
I think that's very one-dimensional.
Wow, that's great. When you approach songwriting, when you've written for someone else versus writing for yourself to perform, is there a different way that you approach it, or is it pretty much doesn't matter, it's the same way?
I guess there's really only one sort of group of songs that I've written that in a sense weren't for myself. I guess what I mean to say is when I wrote a song like Independence Day, I didn't have anybody in mind. It was just a song that I needed to get out. It was there and I could feel it. I had that feeling that you have when you want to write a song, that you have something sort of burning inside of you that you've got to give shape and form to. And so most of the songs that were covered by other artists like Independence Day and like The Secret of Life, really most of them, especially the ones that I wrote by myself, which 90 to 95% of my songs I did write by myself. Those weren't written, quote unquote, for anyone. They were just written. I just wrote them because I wanted to. The only songs that I would say I really did approach for another artist were the songs I wrote with Bryan Adams, really, because Bryan is my longest, only one of 2 kind of long-standing co-writing relationships. And those songs were clearly for his recording. They were for his albums. So in that sense, there was a qualitative difference in those because we were writing for Bryan. We were thinking his voice and his, everything about him as an artist. And I guess, yeah, they are different in that sense, but I function primarily as a lyricist with Bryan. I'm really kind of really focused on the lyrics, but I'm still trying to please myself lyrically. I'm still reach some sort of a bar as a lyricist that I would try to reach in any event. I think I'm just sort of focusing it. And I know him so well because we've been, writing together for 30 plus years.
Wow.
I think that the part of me that's sort of trying to write for his voice, and I mean that in the literal sense and also in the artistic sense, I know him so well that that's almost second nature, I think. I guess the answer is yes and no. There is a difference in those songs, but I think in every other way, when I'm writing a song, I really try to keep all those voices out of the room. Like who would record this? Who might like this? Who would I record this? I really find that those kinds of voices really just kind of get in my way as a writer.
It took a year and a half to write Independence Day. Can you talk a little bit about writing that song? Was it just getting the character right, or?
It's not unusual for me to take a long time to write a song. A year and a half is kind of excessive. What I like to do is have 8 or 10 or 15 songs going, or maybe sometimes even more, in different stages, because that way, if I go into my writing space and I just am not feeling one thing, or I'm feeling more like I'm in an editing sort of brain, I can go to a song that's almost done and that really needs more editing than it does writing. I can always find something to work on, is the reason for that. And I also have a big belief that songs are not ready to be written until they're ready. It's kind of like babies are not ready to be born until they're ready, and it's not up to you. So there's this gestational thing that has to happen. And with some songs, it just takes longer than others. And a lot of times the character, you picked up on that, and I think that's really important. The characters, and especially if it's a story song, like a lot of mine are, the characters have to start walking around and living and breathing and talking back to me. Or I know that I'm going to write them too soon and they'll be two-dimensional. They won't be real. They have to just sort of come alive. And sometimes it takes longer than others to figure out, who are you? I really have this internal dialogue with these characters. Who are you? How did you get here? What makes you tick? I tell my writing students this. It's a lot like actors talking about inhabiting a role, because the place that you want to get to is where you react. You don't have to think twice about it. You don't have to second guess. You just react as the character. But with Independence Day, the other layer of that, and I think the reason why it took such a long time, is I was really afraid of the ending. I could feel the way this story was developing. I could see the story arc. I saw how this woman dealt with her horrific circumstances, and I just didn't want it to end that way. And I was looking for any other way out of the song, essentially. And the parallel, at some point, quite a while after I had finished the song, the parallel between, me trying to find another way out of the song and this character trying to find another way out of her situation, which that she did, try to figure out any way other than the way that she ultimately chose. The parallel really, really struck me. Literally, I was just afraid of the ending. It was violent. It was dark. I didn't want it to go that way. But in the end, I'm so glad that I guess the writer instinct in me is what really kicked in and said, all stories don't end this way, but this story does. This is just how this story went. So I took a few deep breaths and I ended it that way.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about the feedback you've gotten for that song?
When the song came out, it was overwhelming, very emotional. Martina shared a lot of letters and things that she got with me, and I got some of my own. One of the things that I remember that I didn't expect was that a lot of people who peripherally dealt with domestic violence, people like cops and social workers and stuff, had reached out to both of us. I have seen this play out so many times, and you got it right. That was something I really didn't expect. But of course, the most emotionally moving reactions were from women that had been in that situation, and some of whom said, I got out because of your song. I left because of your song. And children who had been in that situation of the daughter.
Wow.
There was a time, early on, because at shows I would play Independence Day, obviously, and there was a time early on when it happened many times. I would play it at a show, and afterward, a woman would approach me, and it was obvious that she'd been crying and, was in a pretty emotional state. I would know. I knew that it had to do with that song. I could just feel, I could feel it. I could sort of see it coming. And I didn't know how to take it. I didn't know how to react because I just wrote the song. I didn't live through it. It's not autobiographical. And I sort of felt not equipped to handle it. And then I realized that a person approaching me, they want to be able to say what they need to say, whether it's thank you or just, I went through this, I lived through this. It's about them. It's not about me, I guess. It's like most things in life, if you're smart, you do do realize ultimately that, people do what they do. It's always more about them. And I learned to just say thank you. Be grateful for the connection that I made with that person at that moment, at that show. Because really, that's the magic that songs have. They cause connection, deep connection sometimes. That's why I'm so hooked on it. I just feel like we have so little of that in our everyday lives. And people can say that music is just entertainment, but I know that this is not true, because I've had these experiences with people in the audience, and I just feel that's a higher calling.
Yeah. Yeah.
A friend of mine said what we do as songwriters is we create empathy machines. These little songs are empathy machines. They create empathy in people. And I love that because it is what I'm trying to channel when I'm writing. And also because I feel like that's a very good thing and something we really need in the world right now.
Oh, yeah.
Is more empathy.
For sure. I think that's the biggest thing that songwriters seek is that connection.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm always struck by people that say about some artist that's very successful that continues to tour well into, old age. So you'll hear people say, they don't need the money. What are they doing it for? They don't need the money. I'm like, is it not obvious to you that it's about connection? Of course they don't need the money. Some of us may need the money, but what drives an artist is not that. It's that incredible feeling that you're really making a connection. And it goes both ways. It's not just the artist reaching out and touching the audience. It comes back at you too. And that's, it's human connection, and it's the best thing we've got going as human beings.
Oh yeah. You are gifted at telling stories in your songs. You also are not afraid to tell hard stories or go to places that other, say, writers are unwilling to go. Why is it important to you to tell those stories, or are you breaching those subjects just as a natural outcome of writing the song?
I think that all writers kind of have old wounds that they pick at, and who knows why. So the first part of my answer would be, I am for some reason drawn to people who are in situations where they feel somewhat powerless. They're clawing their way out of a situation where they feel trapped or powerless. I don't know why that is. Oftentimes they're children or women. But if you look at it, children and women in this culture have less power. That's just a reality. I guess that's where my empathy center lights up. You looked at my brain, that's probably what you would see is those kinds of stories I just really respond to them. The other thing I think is that, a lot of the women in my songs to me are what I would call quietly heroic. It's not about the grand gesture or the big thing. In Independence Day, it is. But a lot of these women are just heroic in the sense that they are getting through. They're doing what they need to do to get through and keep a part of themselves sacred, if you get my meaning.
Yeah.
And I find that kind of in some ways more heroic than overtly heroic heroes. I'm more interested in those kinds of people. They're not always women, but often they are. And I just think those stories, I guess part two of my answer is I'm always interested in telling stories that aren't told quite so often. I wrote a song called The Boy from Rye, which is really about adolescent girls and how they feel when they turn, 11 or 12 or 13 and suddenly realize that they are somehow less the subject of their life than an object to someone else. And they become objectified and how weird that feels. And when I got the idea for that song, the first thing I thought was, there are not enough songs about this. It's incredibly rich subject. And I remember how it felt. I feel like maybe I'm the writer to write this song, maybe because I felt like I had a handle on it. But I was really attracted to the whole idea because I just felt like, there's a million songs about how I love you, but you don't love me. But how many songs are there about this? That to me is attractive in terms of ideas. And these story songs, same thing, really. It's the quiet heroine who's, just trying to get her teenage daughter through school without her getting pregnant or running away, that kind of thing, and doesn't have any money and doesn't really have any agency and is holding down a job that she doesn't love. That's a hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a hero to me. That's what I think attracts me to those characters and to those stories.
You were talking about the hero in 5 minutes.
She's probably my favorite character, and I actually think I've written her in various stages of her life from probably childhood to her 80s in different songs because she just keeps knocking on my door and coming back.
One of the things I love about that song, I love how you tell a complicated story through her cigarette break.
That came out of an exercise that I gave to a group of writers writing students. This just shows you how you can get a song that you just love out of something as pedestrian as a writing prompt. But I gave this prompt to my students because I was trying to get them to understand there can be a whole world contained in a very small period of time, or put it in a very small frame. And so the prompt that I gave them was tell a story that takes place during the span of 5 minutes. And I immediately walked away from that class, that workshop, and I thought, you can't very well give them a prompt and not do it yourself. I need to go home and do the prompt myself. And I started thinking, what can you do in the span of 5 minutes? And as an ex-smoker, I immediately went to, you can smoke a cigarette. That's one thing you can do. Then I sort of started thinking, what did I used to do? What happened when I used to smoke a cigarette? It was part of my day that was a punctuation of, I just got to the end of something. I'm going to have a smoke break and then go on to whatever I'm doing next. I remember go outside and have a cigarette, and my mind would just automatically go far, far away. I would just be lost in my thoughts. And essentially that's what the character in that song does. She goes out back behind the restaurant she works at and lights up and immediately just starts thinking about her life and thinking about what's going on and worrying and doing all the things that we do, all that. It's an internal dialogue song, basically.
Yeah.
And that's the place where I found the idea, was from a simple songwriting prompt.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think Nancy Griffiths, she had a song that was from it might have been Love at the Five and Dime. It was from a songwriting prompt.
Was it really?
I think so.
I love it.
You released an album called The Show, a live album recorded in the UK. Can you talk a little bit about how that album came together?
Yes, it was in the before times. We recorded it in 2018.
Oh, wow.
But did not release it till after, much after. Well, I'll tell you what happened. I had the opportunity to do a tour in the UK, not only with my band, but with 4 string quartet players that I had worked with on a couple festivals. There were 4 women from Scotland, absolutely delightful, wonderful, lovely people and great players. I had played with them at a festival in Scotland, and it just went over so well. My booking agent at the time suggested we do a tour, and initially I thought, there's no way we can, the logistics and the financial logistics and everything, but we made it work, and we did about an 8-city, I think it was 8 or 9 city tour with my band and these 4 women. And the next obvious thing, which again, my booking agent, who's sadly no longer with us, but he was really my partner in crime, and he and I really built my touring career up, from the ground in the UK. He said, you've got to record this. You've got to, you've got to record these shows because this is just really special. And I thought that's true, because when will I have the opportunity to do this again? We didn't record all the shows, but we recorded the last 3, I think, and ended up with this live album. And as we were sort of sifting through the performances, COVID happened. So I had the luxury, I guess, of listening to all the performances and doing all the mixing of everything during lockdown, which at least gave me a project to work on.
Yeah.
And we released it, I want to say 2022. Honestly, that whole time is such a blur to me, but it was quite a ways after. There are 2 discs. One disc is with the string quartet, and the other disc is a group of songs that I did just with my band over there. And it's just such a wonderful snapshot of where we were. We were playing in larger and larger venues in the UK, some really, really beautiful halls. And for me now, it's really bittersweet because we were touring over there at least once a year. Sometimes there were years we went over 4 or 5 times in a year. For me, it's really such a great sort of memory of that time, because right after we recorded it, essentially, our touring just came to a complete halt. I didn't go back out for years. We had people, myself included, who were kind of high risk for COVID. And I saw a lot of people going out early, and somebody would get sick and it derailed the whole tour. And that can be devastating financially for a tour. So it was 3 years for me. So when we were finally able to put live album out, it was very bittersweet, because touring at that point had forever changed. It remains utterly changed now.
Wow, really?
It just logistically, it's so much harder. I did a farewell tour of the UK. I retired from long haul touring in 2020. 2023. And I was lucky because my farewell tour was a success and I was able to make it work. But artists that really were just a notch or two down in terms of the size venues that they're playing, they're finding it impossible. A lot of them. They're finding it, they can't make ends meet. They can't make it work financially. And it's really tragic to me because those venues that a lot of those venues closed during COVID. Those venues that they're playing in were the stepping stones that I, used to get ultimately where I got to. They're not available to these young artists. What are they going to do? How are they going to build a touring career? It's really a problem, I think, that we're going to see. It's almost like they pulled the building blocks away. And now there are artists that are touring at a high level. They're still doing okay. But it's those stepstones, that are not available so much to young artists that it worries me, not for myself, but for them, because to have a healthy, music industry for live music, you need places to play. I don't know what will become. I do know one thing, though. There's no substitute for actual live music, for being in a room in the same space where there's music being made spontaneously and by real humans. And you can't AI that.
No, you really can't. Yeah, there's just something about the energy in a live room that you can never get.
The thing I'm always reaching for in a show, in live performances, I just want to be in a darkened room with everybody else and all of us inside of a song, me included, all of us. And you don't always get there every night, but man, when you do get there, it is magic. And the audience feels it and you feel it. And I think that people that love live music, they know that. That's why they continue to go to shows when, everything's available to us, streaming and, and everything else, but there is no substitute for that connection. Again, it's connection.
Yeah, it's kind of the journey of that connection, right? Because the creation of the song, then putting the music to it, the production, and then the actual sharing of it is kind of the reward, I think.
Yes, totally. Yes.
I do want to encourage everybody to go listen to the song Camille. The lyrics on that song are just phenomenal that you wrote with Susie Boggess and Matresa Berg.
Oh, I'm so proud of that song. And two of us have recorded it. I'm hoping for a triple play. I'm hoping Matresa does too, because she does a great version of it.
Oh, okay. Cool. And I wanted to encourage everybody to look on your website regarding the songwriting workshops that you have available.
The surprise of my life, how much I love teaching. I've really been kind of doing it in earnest for the last 10 or 12 years, I guess. Before that, you could have asked me about teaching songwriting and I would have said, you can't teach songwriting. You can't. And I kind of still believe that, but I do believe that you can really turn some light bulbs on. You can really illuminate some things. It's just been so gratifying and meaningful to me to be with these songwriters who really want to become better writers and try to sort of help them do that, help them see things that they're doing, help them see things that maybe they're not doing that they could, help them kind of engage their subconscious a little bit more, which I think is a real key part of writing. Mm-hmm. And also, like any teacher will tell you, when you start to teach people what your process is, you start to learn things about yourself. That's why teachers will say, I get as much or more out of this than they do. And now I know what they mean because I've really learned some things about myself, which I think have deepened me as a writer. And what I'm really trying to do with students at my workshops is help them deepen their writing, really. It's not that I'm teaching how to write. It's really, I'm teaching, how can we get deeper? How can we really make these protagonists, these narrators, every song, whether it's a story song or not, has a narrator. There's a voice. How can we make that voice deeper, more real, more authentic? That's what I'm always after with the workshops.
Well, Gretchen, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed this interview and all your stories about your songs and songwriting. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been great. What great questions. It's a refreshing and it's a joy to talk about the stuff that doesn't always come up because it's not on the surface, but I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Join us back in 2 weeks for our exciting interview with Sony Music Nashville country artist Zach John King. His unique sound is a blend of roots poet meets alt rock meets country. Thank you so much for listening to AmericanaMusic.com podcast. Be sure to go to AmericanaMusic.com and find playlists of the Americana artists we've interviewed here. Also, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform.